Miután ez egy fesztivál, ezért ezt én odébb húzom. Megoldjuk. Jó lesz így. Persze, megkíméltem a hölgyeket. Ezért kicsit műfajt váltunk, és a következőkben nem egy előadást fogtok hallani, hanem egy beszélgetést. Méghozzá egy olyan vezetővel, aki a biznisz oldaláról jön. Itt Magyarországon 2000 embert vezet, de regionális vezetői funkciójából fakadóan összességében 3000 ember munkájáért, és tulajdonképpen sorsáért felelős. Hadd mutassam be nektek, hadd konferáljam fel nektek Dr. Jane Ellis, aki a Citi Shared Services EMEA hegye. Fogadjátok szeretettel a színpadon. Jane, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Jó napot.
Your Hungarian is quite good. Jó napot it was perfect.
That's the only Hungarian I know, so sorry.
But as I told you, Hungarian people are very happy and satisfied if someone from abroad tell even jó napot in the right way. Igazam van? You see. Okay, so this is going to be a conversation between the two of us. I think you probably know that these people in the audience, most of them are HR experts. And you do represent the business because you lead the business. And I think one of the most important questions, which would be nice to clarify, what are the most important challenges you see HR, let's say, faces in terms of supporting the business nowadays or in the future?
And it's a great question. And I actually have my HR head here in the audience, Katja. Oh, there she is. She's waving. So Katja is my HR head for the 2,000 people I have here in Budapest, but she has to work with lots of other HR partners who represent the functions. Mm-hmm. So that's always a challenge for her in terms of how she influences, but she works across the product. She works with people. So for me, HR need to be collaborative with each other. They need to understand the business needs. They need to be empathetic. I think increasingly there's a sort of short-term and long-term view. The short-term view is, how is the market changing? How do we encourage career development? How do we encourage lateral mobility and mobility across different products? Long-term is, what's the future of work? I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but, how do we encourage people to be forward compatible and fit for the future? And so Katja's role is very much around helping people understand that, thinking about how we improve our talent, how we attract people, how we retain people, and retrain people actually as we go forward. So it's a really critical role. It isn't something that you get just because you've got a job title doesn't mean you're successful. It is around really working hard and actually pushing your way into conversations that maybe the business doesn't want you to be in. So that bit is always a bit of friction. If you think that you have a right to be involved in that conversation, there'll be a challenge there. Whereas if you try and encourage and bring something to the party, it's much better.
Before the conversation, we had the chance to talk a bit between the two of us. And I asked you, which is, I think, a very important question at the moment regarding HR and their performance in an organization. It's this, that the success of the company depends a lot on how much HR as a function is involved in the decision-making. How much the business relies on HR and everything HR can add to the business. Whose responsibility it is, and to what extent, as an HR person or as an HR function, to be part of the management or part of the decision-making?
It's a tricky question.
For that.
Yeah, I think in some ways, it's my responsibility as site head to make sure that my functions involve my HR head. So I'm very determined that happens. But in addition, if my HR head wasn't more sympathetic and empathetic to the businesses, I couldn't force my businesses to take her advice. So to be honest, it's a skill that she has already, and that's why we moved her from Bulgaria, where she was working, to here. So she got the role through the fact that she has that ability. And that was one of the key things for me in hiring her was, can she work with a multitude of different people, different cultures, and persuade people to do things differently?
You mentioned persuasion, and this was interesting for me because you told this to me outside as well, that this depends very much on the HR person.
Yeah.
So how influential they can be. And is it, as a leader, is this the only thing you see? So once the HR person or the HR function is strong enough to try to persuade you or influence you? Is this the only way to be involved?
Well, possibly. So if I look at my own role, so I'm the shared services head for the service centre here. I own about 1,000 of the 2,000 people who work for me directly, but I've got 1,000 people who work for other products. Part of my role is how influential I can be, what I can bring to persuade the other products to work for me and to do things together. So I think that's the nature of our matrix structure that we have. Is certainly as a large global corporate where the functions sit in the US or the UK and they have their teams here. We've all got to influence, and so it's not the only thing. But I think naturally you just take that further.
As you mentioned, you do have around 2,000 employees here in Hungary, but you are responsible for other 1,000 around the region.
Yes.
What I would like to ask you about at the moment is any specialties of Hungary, if you compare, let's say, the HR situation or the workforce situation, or these kind of situations compared to the region and all the other venues you already worked, or what you see now in your large corporation?
So for me, Hungary is a key location for technological roles. So we know there's a drive for innovation. We know there's a great deal of people who have technical ability. And so for us, we've got a large cyber centre here. We've also got software development. So that for me is significant. I think in addition, language skills are a major. Whilst I don't have great language skills myself, I think English is a real key for me, and certainly the enunciation, the pronunciation that people are using here is really good. So that's a critical skill. We have people who speak 32 languages in our service centre. And
so you don't really face that difficulty or challenge, which we read in the news, that Hungarians lack language skills.
I don't see that.
That's
I don't see that. And I think part of it is to try and also make sure that once we get people in who have those skills, we help them think about their next career move, because it might not be in their current function, it might be in a different function. So we've got to talk about lateral mobility increasingly to keep people longer in the organization.
You use the expression getting people in, which is, I think, as you all know here in the audience as well, in Hungary at least, it's getting more and more difficult, not only getting people in, but retaining them later on as well. So what do you see? How can HR support the business in terms of this question?
I think we have to start getting creative. So it's great having the pool of graduates that most of the service centres rely on, because we all hire in large proportions of graduates every year. But we have to look at maternity returners. We have to look at flexibility. So can we do 6 hours a day rather than 8 hours a day? Can we encourage mothers to come back to work early? Can we give them more flexibility? And I think that has to be something we build on to create more loyalty, to reduce attrition and everything else. So we're focusing on that. We're looking at people with disability. Can we bring them into the organisation? Can we support different diversities in that way? So that's critical for us in terms of our future health here. And I guess in terms of just the market is competitive here. Attrition is a fact of life, but how do you reduce that and make that a minimum?
I see. Future is always a question for us. So what do you see? How will the future change the role of the HR people? And what do you see, let's say, in the next 3-5 years? I know this is very difficult to guess, especially because it's a very fast-changing word, as we all know, the VUCA word, as we call it. But what you see, or what you think will happen? This is all so interesting for us.
Absolutely. I mean, I think everyone's role will change. So I don't believe HR is the only role that will change. But if you think of, I was talking to Katja this morning about how things would change. In Amazon, for example, if I buy coffee from Amazon, potentially in the future, and I have an Alexa at home, Alexa is going to suggest I buy a coffee machine. So Amazon have huge amounts of my data and will start suggesting to me things. And that's my personal life, and that's one thing. If you think about the data that HR professionals will have at their fingertips soon and do now, a lot of the challenges around ethics. So, you might know all the data that you've got on Facebook, on recruitment and everything else, but are you going to be able to use that in recruitment decisions, in hiring decisions, in promotions? Should HR be the kind of ethical guardian to really help us think about how we use data in organizations in the future? Because there is huge amounts out there. We all have the challenge around our own personal data, but actually companies will have a great deal of data to look at, and who is looking after that? Who is safeguarding how we approach that? And I think the ethical dilemma, there's a lot of work that will be substituted with AI for all of us, and HR, I'm sure, is no different. But a lot of this is around ethics, about the humanist angle that we have to focus on, for me.
You mentioned artificial intelligence, AI, which is obviously a supportive tool as well, but sometimes we have the conversation around here is, because we face the lack of workforce, especially here in Hungary, probably especially in those sectors where you work as well, AI can be part of the workforce as well after a while. Probably this is the sideway of the conversation, but I'm just curious about your opinion. How can you imagine that this is going to happen in your organization as well?
It certainly will. I mean, for me, it's about augmentation. So we talk about augmenting roles rather than replacing them. I think we will end up with people whose role is to manage robots, maybe robots and people. Maybe there's a sort of combination of that. And I think also there are people who are going to have to maintain. So one of the things they talk around with robotics is that robots have to be maintained. They have to be updated. They're a bit like our phones. There's always software updates. There's always, you have to press a button. There's always things you have to do. Continual maintenance happens with technology. So we have to have people who can do that as well. So I think we'll just see a range of skill sets. We may have people who I think learning to be a manager will be a challenge because you may not have people to test that out on. We're looking at the junior levels of the organization being more transactional work to be certainly done by AI eventually, but at the moment it's not there yet. There's lots of stuff happening, lots of great talk, but and we're certainly looking at it, but we're not ready to do that yet. The technology is not as advanced as it could be.
So far, thanks God, we have to think and talk about real human beings, and they have, I think, different needs than robots will have. For example, working environment, work-life balance. How can HR support you in terms of that, or what can you offer? What do you think it's important to offer to the workforce regarding these questions?
I think it will depend. I mean, we have a service centre. We expect people to come to that service centre location. There's no doubt that Generation Z or millennials are demanding more and more flexibility and maybe working from home. I'm quite old-fashioned. I think I worked out this morning that I'm probably Generation X. So I quite like coming to the office. I don't necessarily have particular empathy with people who don't want to come to the office because I like the environment. So I think, we're going to have to find a comfortable way of making that work. If you think about it, we're going to have at least 4 generations of people working for us soon. So people are retiring later and people are starting work at the same time. So we're going to have 50 years, the sort of longevity of people in one organization at the same time. So I think, maybe when you get to 65 or 70, you might want to come in 2 days a week. That's fine. And if you're, on maternity leave, maybe you only want to come back for 6 hours a day. So I think we're going to have to be much more flexible about the portfolio and how we hire people, how we give them the opportunity to do bits of work. So I think we're going to have to look at how jobs are done. It's not going to be a 9 to 5 anymore.
At the end, let me ask you a kind of imaginary question about, can you imagine that at one point in the future, HR as a function can be or could be eliminated, not even existing?
It would be very dangerous for me to stand on the stage in front of lots of HR people.
So give us some guarantee.
I think all of us are going to have to find clever ways of changing with the technology. So for me, the ethics stuff that I said about the remaining humanist, the empathetic angle, that bit needs to continue, if not needs to grow, because robots aren't empathetic yet. They might try and replicate what we do, but they're not yet there yet. So I think, HR, whether it's called HR, who knows? Whether there needs to be a site head, I don't know. I mean, I'm not ever going to retire, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to come back and make the tea or something in the future. So we'll see what happens.
Jane, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.